My mum, during her young adulthood and even after her marriage, well after I was born actually, she put together a massive collection of school storybooks. Elsie Oxenham, Chalet School, GFB, Angela Brazil, Blighter, lots of those, So, when I was growing up, I had a massive stash to delve into. And today I'm going to talk about Dimsie. This is one of my mum's favorite series, and one of the earlier set of school stories that I read while growing up. The Dimsie books, there are 10 of them, and a collection of short stories. They were written between 1921 and 1941 by a Scottish author born in Spain, but somebody who returned to Scotland with roots in Scotland, called Dorita Fairlie. That is the Spanish form of Dorothy. Now, for the purpose of this channel, we will be referring to her as DFB. She wrote 39 books in all and a collection of short stories. We're not counting the short stories because they were published in various annuals. Just 10 of those were the Dimsie books. She took her protagonist beyond school, outside of school, growing up, getting married, having children, having her own family. She did that, and a couple of other authors did so as well, instead of just sticking to school. Eleanor Brent Dyer did that with Joe Maynard. Now, at the time of their publication, these books were insanely popular, with good reason, because the school story as a genre had been popularized by Angela Brazil already. And we'll talk about Angela Brazil another time. Promise, there are at least 2 videos to be had from her. Now, apart from Dimsie, DFB wrote other series as well. She wrote the Nancy books, that is 8 books. St. Bride's is the name of the school. She wrote another 7 books in the Springdale series and 9 Colmskirk novels. Those are for adults. 3 Toby books, 3 Sally books, and then there were sundry standalones and short stories as well. For this video, I'm just going to address the Dimsie books. We'll do the Nancy books and the Springdale books and so on, in other separate videos. Otherwise, we'll be here all week. So DFB went to boarding school herself, to a school called Clarence House. Nothing to do with Prince Charles. That became the model for Jane Willard, the Jane Willard Foundation, which is the boarding school in the Dimsie books. I do want to talk more about the popularity of the school story and why it became popular at that particular time in the early 20th century, but that is a video in itself. Just the one sentence. The boys' school story, the boarding school story. According to Mary Cadogan, the popularity began to wane when the popularity of the girls' school story was on the rise. And according to Mary Cadogan, that is because boys had access to education first, earlier than girls. And they read these books and realized that they were painting an unrealistic picture of lots of fun and games in boarding school, and were quickly disillusioned, so the genre became unpopular first. Whereas girls were just starting to go to boarding school, and the books, they loved what they were reading. This is according to Mary Cadogan. Do I agree or not? Separate video another time. Otherwise, we'll never get to Dimsie. Now, unlike the Chalet School, there were no paperbacks at all published by, Armada and so on. Chalet School books were published by Armada. Just William was published in paperback format by Macmillan. These were never published in paperback format. Sometime in the 1980s, they were republished, again as hardbacks. But, they were heavily updated, so there were huge changes. And they were made current. They were set in the 1980s, which doesn't make sense to me. These are not the updated versions. Not all of these are first editions. Some are not. But, these are early editions collected painstakingly in the 1990s and early 2000s by my mother. So the first book, Dimsie Goes to School. That's a frontispiece. And that young girl is Dimsie Maitland. Dimsie is Daphne Isabel Maitland. Her cousin, Daphne Maitland, is also at the Jane Willard Foundation as a senior. D.I.M. Daphne Isabel Maitland. D.I.M. That is where Dimsie gets her nickname. So she's Dimsie and her cousin is Daphne, although both are officially Daphne Maitland. Now, book 1, Dimsie Goes to School, was first published as The Senior Prefect and focused more on the elder Daphne Maitland, and less on Dimsie. I feel that this was, apart from the one terrible sentence that I'll talk about in a minute, the best book in the series, because there was a lot going on. What happens basically is that there is a new headmistress for the school, and the new headmistress means business. The older headmistress was happy to, let things pass as they stand as they were. There was more focus on games and sports than on academics, and which is great, but the students weren't passing their examinations at all. Very little prep time and more sport time. The new headmistress changes all that, and the hockey captain is not happy. She tries to get everybody to go on strike, but the senior prefect, standing in for the head girl, who is also absent for the major part of this book, is Daphne Maitland, and the senior prefect wants to stand with the headmistress because it is her duty to do so, and because she knows in her heart of hearts that that is right. So she is ably backed by Dimsie and the other students. And Dimsie is a new girl in this book, and just as the headmistress of the chalet school had a soft spot for Jo, the headmistress of the Jane Willard Foundation has a soft spot for Dimsie. In addition to all of this, there is also Dimsie's backstory here going on. And here, I feel that this is not just, a school story written for children. There is a mystery surrounding Dimsie's mother. And here is where I feel that this book becomes quite adult, in its seriousness and gravity. Her mother disappeared after being suspected of cheating at cards. Mental health issues are addressed in this book. There is more gravitas to this book than to the others. And Dimsie's mother lost a child, so there's loss of a child being dealt with, and believes that she's lost Dimsie as well, and is not in the best of mental health. So a lot of these issues are addressed in this book. I'm not going to spoil anything further, as though I haven't done so already. You'll have to read the book to find out what happens and how it all, sorts itself out in the end. The problem, hang on, let me find my place marker, and I'm not going to read it aloud. I'm going to come close to the camera. I'm going to show you the line. This is the one thing in the entire series that I can't stand. Apart from this series actually wasn't problematic, compared to so many other series, so many other books written at the time. And the sentence that I am talking about is this one. Besides, from here. Now, the edition that I have is from 1940, minus the 7th reprint. Obviously, until 1940, this hadn't been updated. I don't know if the updated version carries that horrendous line. Mary Cadogan isn't happy with the one part of the book that I like. That is, DFB addressing other issues as well. Mary Cadogan says, Dimsie goes to school, puts across an effective school atmosphere, but gets out of hand when the author goes outside the limits of school life to augment her plot. Dimsie's mother, who in a fit of derangement after the war, has left her husband and child to run off with a set of card sharpers, is found living in a house near the school in a state of bemused remorse. The line of the moral melodrama is followed even to the point of bringing in the old servant who will not abandon her mistress. I disagree. I think a school story doesn't have to be enclosed within the four walls of a school. Students have a life. Everybody has a life outside of school. Eleanor Brent Dyer tried to break away from four walls of the school in some of her books. Jo to the Rescue comes to mind. Absolutely no mention of the school. I like that, It doesn't have to be stuck within the school all the time. Look at Hogwarts. In the 7th Harry Potter book, the 3 were not at school. Yes, they did come back to fight, but who attended classes and lessons there? They were on the run for the major part, and it's not as though, Harry was able to focus so much on classes and lessons with all that he had to endure over 7 years anyway. I like that there is a life outside of school. I like that J.K. Rowling talked about the Dursleys, gave us an understanding into what made Harry the way he was. His upbringing, his early childhood. I like that there was that background. I like how he found a home among the Weasleys. This isn't just about school. So a school story doesn't have to revolve around school as such. So here, all due respect to Mary Cadogan, I disagree. I like that. I like that there's more to it than just, school and lessons. Because otherwise, when you're writing a series, the books become very, very similar. Take Eleanor Brent Dyer. A lot of the later chalet school stories become very similar to one another. the same situations. New girl not fitting in, yeah, runs away, is brought back, there's a flood, or, some kind of other disaster, avalanche, mistress not well. Something of the sort, the same kind of tricks played. I think that this book stands out, Dimsie Goes to School, because of this feature, because of bringing in the backstory, because of addressing mental health issues even. Mary Cadogan also has a problem with the students in here not being typical adolescents as the students were in the prime of Miss Jean Brodie. The Prime of Jean Brodie was a movie I absolutely loved. Dame Maggie Smith was beyond brilliant in that movie, I think. Yeah, she's right. Typically, adolescents and young adults do think a lot about sex. And that isn't there at all in this. It isn't there in Chalet School, it isn't there in Enid Blyton, it isn't there in a lot of the school stories that were written at the time. It isn't there in Angela Brazil, it isn't there in Ethel Talbot, it isn't there in Marjorie Bevan, it isn't there in Doris Pocock, it isn't there in Dorothy Moore. So this isn't the exception that Mary Cadogan can find. It was the rule at the time. Trebizond, for instance, a later series, that obviously has a lot of, interaction with the opposite sex and hormones and, typical adolescent feelings. So does Harry Potter. By book 6, it becomes, quite there. Obviously, books that were published 50 or 60 years earlier are not going to be like that. Yeah, the prime of Miss Jean Brodie was ahead of its time. That was the exception. Dimsie wasn't the exception. Dimsie was the rule. And that is not taking away at all from either book. I love both. I love Dimsie as much as I love the prime of Jean Brodie. Now, a word about our protagonist, Dimsie Maitland. She is starting her school career in Dimsie Goes to School, or the senior prefect. She doesn't mean it for cheek, but she's somebody who speaks her mind. I had a colleague who said that, calling a spade was childlike. I disagree. I think it takes all kinds to make the world. Some people may not like it, some people don't mind. Dimsie is somebody who clearly doesn't mind. She's very straightforward, and she doesn't mean it for cheek. Does this remind you of two other characters? The first one is Mary Lou Trelawney. In her early school career, Mary Lou didn't mean it for cheek, but was very straightforward in how she spoke to everybody. Seniors, prefects, teachers, everybody. The other thing is Dimsie doesn't let things lie. If she feels something is wrong, she barges in, intervenes. There is a book called Dimsie Intervenes, and puts things right. This reminds you of Jo Maynard in The Chalet School. Was the one a prototype for the other? One wonders. Possibly not, but some similarity there. On the other hand, though, Dimsie does grow up, get married, leaves the school. She does go back to it to work as a secretary a couple of times. I'll talk about that in a minute. But, for the major part, when she leaves school, she's in touch with her friends, she's in touch with the headmistress, she's in touch with other pupils, and she's there when the school needs her. But she doesn't go about, following the school around Europe, wherever it moves, like Jo Maynard. She doesn't live next door. She's sort of moved on and has her own life, while maintaining a close connection with her alma mater. This, I feel, is where Jo Maynard was, towards the later books, a bit much. While there are old girls going back to stay, they too have their own lives, unlike Jo Maynard. Yeah, you have close connections and a certain fondness for your old school, that you smile each time you think about it. Or, try to visit whenever possible and have reunions. But, yeah, you don't follow the school around Europe, wherever it moves. You don't live next door to your school for the rest of your life. Right, I don't know why I'm comparing the two. Mind you, I adore the Chalet School early books. We'll talk about that in another video. The second book is called Dimsie Moves Up. Obviously, she's a year older. It was published in 1922. The hockey captain, who was vengeful in book 1, is also there, and she is all the worse. She's a bully, she's a completely rotten senior, she's manipulative, she's somebody who deserves expulsion. But this school is unique in that it's never expelled anybody. Even the Chalet School expelled Thekla. Also, very exciting, Dimsie and her friend Pam discover some hidden caves beneath the school. So they've moved up from the 3rd division to the 4th division. This is a new system that we haven't come across in other school stories. The Jane Willard Foundation follows the division system. So Dimsie, in her first book, appears as a 3rd division student, moves up to the 4th division. and the sixth, apparently, are the seniors. Dimsie and her friends, Rosamund Garth, a younger sister of Primrose Garth, who is classmate of Daphne Maitland, Pamela Hughes, Jane Gordon, Erica Rinnes, and there's Mabs Hunter. Now, together, these characters form the Anti-Soppis League, which discourages soppiness and, has its own set of rules and regulations. The society is headed by Erica Rinnes, who is the eldest. The kind of sentimentality, the soppiness that you have in certain school series, particularly the Abbey Girls, is completely lacking as a result of the Anti-Soppist Society's very strict rules. Now, the third one is called Dimsie Moves Up. Again, nice dust jacket there. This is where Dimsie moves from adorable little kid to prototype of Jo Bettany, kind of, taking charge of situations and putting things right, kind of a put 'em right, if you will. She not only gives a lot of support to the reluctant head girl, but also takes a newcomer senior. She's still a middle schooler, Dimsie, and she takes a senior newcomer, Fenella Postlethwaite, under her wing. And this Fenella Postlethwaite is a character who thinks she knows it all, but isn't actually a know-it-all. The character of Stacey Benson in the Chalet School was a know-it-all, but she actually knew it all. I mean, there was no one to touch her in the classics. Whereas Fenella Postlethwaite thinks she's a know-it-all, but actually isn't. Is quite ignorant. There is another book called The Mascot of Sunnyside. Here there's a girl called Sybil, who is a know-it-all, who knows it all, because, she is very advanced in all her subjects. On the other hand, Fenella Postlethwaite, quite ignorant, and thanks to her ignorance, there is a massive theft of a famous painting. And Dimsie, with her courage, ingenuity and resourcefulness, gets it back. Now, Dimsie also has a bit of a skirmish with one of her friends, Pam, because she understands from her other friend, Jane Gordon, that Jane's father wants her to do better in academics and not as much at sports. She asks Pam to play better, and get into all the teams at the cost of Jane. This is at Jane's request, but Pam doesn't know that, and Pam begins to resent Dimsie for taking away Jane's position in the teams and, practically handing it over to her. So there's a bit of that drama as well going on. So Dimsie is somebody who is a champion barger in or butter in, which is what Jo Bettany was called in the Chalet School. So that's Dimsie Moves Up again. And then we have Dimsie among the prefects. Erica Rinnes is head girl. Now here we have a new girl coming in. Her name is Hilary Garth. She is niece to Primrose and Rosamund Garth. Rosamund is Dimsie's classmate and friend. When you first meet Hilary Garth, you don't take to the character. This kid is 12 years old and she bites people to get away from situations. She bites Dimsie, and towards the end she bites somebody else as well. That's not what a 12-year-old does. That's what a 4-year-old does. That was my big problem at first. But Hilary thankfully matures and becomes a character whom you like. I feel that DFB, like Eleanor Brent Dyer, tried to have a successor for her protagonist, and Hilary Garth is successor to Dimsie in the school, just as Mary Lou Trelawney was successor to Jo Bettany. Now the problem with Hilary is that she's read too many boys' adventure stories and is trying to reenact those things. And in this book we have the first running away situation, because the other 3 books did not have a running away situation at all. This one has the first running away, and she endangers the life of Dimsie as a result. Here there are parallels between Dimsie and Jo yet again, because Jo Bettany had this habit of having her life endangered regularly early on in the series and falling very dangerously ill. So Dimsie, this happens to her for the first time in Dimsie Among the Prefects. And also, one of her anti-soppist friends, Jane Gordon, starts writing poetry. And there is also the famous school ghost making an appearance here. But is it really a ghost? You're going to have to read to find out. So that is Dimsie Among the Prefects, the 4th book of the series. And then you have Dimsie Head Girl. Now, Dimsie doesn't automatically become head girl. Somebody else does, Jane Gordon. Unfortunately, she gives more importance to poetry than the school, and Dimsie intervenes for the benefit of the school a few times until there is a situation where the head has to replace Jane with Dimsie as head girl. And the former is unable to take this very well at first, although she knows in her heart of hearts that it was all for the best. She sort of resents her disgrace and Dimsie's promotion to head girl. So that's the drama surrounding this book. It was quite unique because, you know, Jo Bettany was dead cert for head girl, just as Mary Lou Trelawney was. Dimsie, our protagonist, wasn't a dead cert for head girl at first, you know, but it was actually a replacement for somebody else. So yeah, that is in the usual school story plot. You know, Daryl Rivers became head girl of Mallory Towers. There was no competition, nothing. No other question. Here you have Dimsie becoming head girl after a bit of drama. So yeah, interesting part. As if all this wasn't enough, Hilary Garth decides to start an animal orphanage where she proceeds to collect, rescue animals and store them within those underground caves discovered earlier by Dimsie and Pam. So yeah, loads of adventure and drama and confusion to be had here. And then you have the book which has absolutely no setting in the school at all, Dimsie Grows Up. Here, she meets Dr. Peter Gilmore and, you know, has crazy adventures with him at first. And then Dimsie was supposed to become a doctor, but, you know, her father unfortunately passes away, and she then decides to run a herb garden in Scotland, which is apparently what her ancestor used to do long before her. All jobs have their dignity. It's just that here we have another situation where a woman doesn't become a doctor, but, you know, marries a doctor. Shall I school anybody? I do wish Dimsie had become a doctor, if only to break that stereotype of women not becoming doctors, but, you know, marrying doctors in those early school stories. She also meets a young girl named Linty Gordon, who, it turns out, is niece to Jane Gordon. Other people propose to Dimsie as well. I'm not going to tell you who they are and spoil it. She has a lot of doubts about whether she really feels for this man. And there's a poem that she refers to. I'm not going to tell you the poem. It's a beautiful poem. But Dimsie is very straightforward and discusses all her doubts and apprehensions with Dr. Gilmore himself. And he, you know, reassures her. So Dimsie gets engaged. In addition, Dimsie also turns matchmaker and brings about happiness for Pamela Hughes. She also brings about happiness for Rosamond, along with Pamela Hughes' brother, who is a midshipman naval cadet. They all end up marrying each other's brothers, actually, after a fashion. Now, in Dimsie Goes Back, Dimsie becomes secretary to Headmistress Miss York for a term. And then you have a senior named Carol Dainsbury, who is, unlike the typical traditional schoolgirl, very interested in boys and makeup. While this is very, very realistic, in vintage school stories, a girl, a student of any age interested in boys and makeup wasn't considered natural, wasn't considered normal, wasn't considered realistic. She was considered an anomaly and somebody to be corrected. Not just Dimsie, Chalet School, the entire, you know, lot of vintage school stories, don't agree. Now, Linty Gordon brings her dog to school, and, you know, there are some adventures involving the dog as well. And Jane's brother, Derek, presumed dead, makes an appearance. He's actually alive. He gets engaged to Erica Innes, and he is actually Linty Gordon's father. So Hilary Garth is quite mature by now, and she revives the anti-sophist society. And I really like how Hilary's character is shaping up in this book, Dimsie Goes Back. The next two books I have with me, but are, you know, missing for some reason. I've hunted and hunted last night, and, you know, I couldn't find them. Dimsie Intervenes, published in 1937. This, again, you know, is very atypical of the vintage school stories written at the time. Here, Hilary Garth starts a beauty parlor in school in order to raise money to buy a piano for a girls' club in the village. This obviously is frowned upon in vintage school stories. They actually end up colouring somebody's hair in a very startling colour, actually, for the time. And somebody else ends up caught in their undies, no less. So yeah, that is Dimsie Intervenes, and Dimsie, who is still secretary for Miss York, intervenes and puts things right. This book I didn't really like because of how it frowned upon whatever was going on and made Dimsie God player. I like Dimsie as a character even more than Jo Bettany. Jo Maynard, not Jo Bettany. I loved Jo Bettany, but, you know, later books, Chalet School, not a fan of older Jo Maynard. Dimsie I really liked until Dimsie Intervenes. Intervenes because, I felt she was too much of a god player. The next one is Dimsie Carries On, written in 1941, obviously set during World War II. So she is married to Dr. Peter Gilmore. She has 2 children. She's running her herb garden. So there are 2 girls. Primilla Mary, not related to the Primilla Mary in the Shelley School books, don't worry. And Anne. The former is appointed as dispatch rider during the war, but there is spy catching in the middle of the Scottish mountains and lakes, because where else do spies hide, eh? So the spy in question is actually governess to Dimsie's children, a Miss Ewell, E-W-E-L-L, Ewell. Anyone? So she's there to find plans of a secret base hidden in the Scottish mountains. And Anne, who assists Dimsie in her herb garden, feels instinctively that all is not well. This again is not at all a school story, set completely outside of school. It did play up to the, anti-German sentiment that was going on at the time, I'm afraid. Lastly, this is Dimsie Takes Charge. 10 short stories set over the years from before Dimsie came to school to after Dimsie's marriage were written by DFB for various annuals, for Mrs. Strang's annual, Mrs. Herbert Strang pseudonym. We'll talk more about Mrs. Strang's annuals. I have a couple in another video. So yeah, Oxford Annuals for girls, great book of school stories for girls, and Mrs. Strang's annuals, red book for girls. So this is a compilation of those short stories, and here we hear about Jane Gordon's elder sister Mona Gordon and find out why Jane is the way she is and doesn't really fit in with the other anti-soppists as much. We also find out why and how Sylvia became head girl, and there is also a story featuring Hilary Garth outside of school visiting Dimsie in Scotland, and there is a monster in a lock. That's all I'm going to say. Not going to spoil any of these. Now, one thing I really love about the series is that nobody is bad beyond redemption. There is no Tekla. There is no Angela Fairlie. There is no one who's utterly rotten beyond redemption. There is no Hubert Lane. Everybody has it turns for the better, ultimately. But I feel that Dimsie's character went a bit towards Dimsie Intervenes. Now, a Swedish lady named Eva Lofgren is an expert on DFB. She actually had a thesis published. I keep seeing the links to this thesis on various websites. Unfortunately, the link's been removed. The content has been removed and the link is now a dead link. So I'm not going to be linking it below. If anybody knows where I can find a copy of the thesis, I would love to read it. I think she's got it published, but I can't find it in the market either. Now, if this were written by Eleanor Brent Dyer, I think she would have ended the series at Daffy's marriage. That is Daffodil, Dimsie's daughter, Daffodil. I know, her house is called Twinkle Tap, her daughter's called Daffodil, Daffy for short. So yeah, she would have ended it at Daffy's marriage. Thankfully, this wasn't Eleanor Brent Dyer, so yeah, the series ends with Dimsie's 2 children. I loved Dimsie's school career. I would have liked to see more of Daphne, more of Dimsie's mother, more of Sylvia, but I feel that the series addresses a lot of the real world, unlike other vintage school stories of the time. Angela Brazil did not address anything that was outside of school. Eleanor Brent Dyer remained focused around Jove. After the first half was brilliant. The Shelley School at War, The Shelley School in Exile, bloody brilliant books that focused on the real world. After that, latter books, that's what I'm talking about, maybe after about 24, book number 24. When you write 67 books, there are going to be problems after, say, 24 or 25. Now, there are a number of tropes within the Dimsie series as well that were in the regular vintage school story. There are breaking instances of the students breaking bounds a lot. There are rotten seniors, there are mischievous middles, there is importance given to honor, there are mentions of 1 or 2 midnight feasts, there are new children who don't fit in, but there is also adulthood and coming of age, and this is done less abruptly than Joy. And because, Jo Bettany, one page she's declaring that she'll never get married, and then one page she's fleeing the Nazis, the next page she's engaged to Jack. All of a sudden, Dimsie's feelings for Peter Gilmore develop over time, over a whole book, and it is shown wonderfully how she comes to depend on him more and more, how he occupies her thoughts more and more. Eventually, I really, really, really like how Dimsie Grows Up dealt with her growing feelings for somebody whom she'd met recently, and how she has her doubts about all this, how she declared she would never marry, and that she'd always be unsoapy, and then, you know, she can't stop thinking about this person. This is a lot better than, you know, one book, one page, will never marry, next page gets engaged to Jack Maynard. So yeah, I liked how this relationship has been developed. So those are my thoughts on the Dimsie series by DFB. I think she's a very likable character, and the series is short and sweet. Agreed. There is the one horrendous piece of racism, absolutely racist, shocking sentence uttered towards the end of book one. Thankfully, it does not get repeated in the other books. I like how the series doesn't revolve around the school, how she grows up. This is more of a coming of age series from a schoolgirl to an adult woman, an adult mother, than, you know, just a school series, which is what the Chalet series became. So, have you read the Dimsie books by DFB? Are you a fan? Do tell me that in the comments below. Which is your favorite school series? Or are you not a fan of the school story? Do you like coming of age books? If so, which is your favorite in that niche? Do tell me that in the comments below. So that's all from me for today. Thank you for watching this video. Please do give me a thumbs up. Please do hit the subscribe button. Please do ring the notifications bell, and I'll speak to you next Sunday.